Oh, so no, it's all right. And it was funny, Angie, her brother, myself, the chief, but everybody was there for different reasons, so he had an entourage of 10 people. I think he almost got on the plane going out. I was like, oh my God.
One more minute, then we'll get going. How's that?
We had Nikki online and also, Ms. Burgess.
Okay, good.
She was coming, but is not feeling great, and if she has something or spread, don't bring it. A lot of people got the crud, it seems, right now.
Minute within the 1 minute.
Mayor?
I'm trying to figure out something to reply, but I better not. Mr. Minion.
I didn't say that. I did. You did.
All right, let's call this work session to order. We do have a agenda for a budget work session. We also have some people that are in the council chambers here that were here for the last work session and wanted to speak but didn't get a chance to speak. So I guess I'll ask the council if they want to hear from a few people before we get going through our agenda item to help guide us on the way. If not, they can also speak. This is a work session, so you can speak throughout as well. So, is anybody in the audience that'd like to address the work session for the council during the work session? Regarding budget items?
Hello, everybody. Larry Peterson, longtime Nome resident, graduated from adults here, families here mostly. Saw all this information throughout all the media sources, through KOM, through the Nugget, kind of following the city council here. I guess my input is the last meeting, you guys were looking for an immediate solution, and I guess my input would be the only immediate solution that would be fair kind of across the board and capture the seasonal workforce, the miners that show up in the summer and all of that would be a sales tax. So if you need something by next week, that would be what I would recommend. But long-term, I would encourage the council and the new city manager and staff to look into the city limits. The city, there's probably over 100 households outside of city limits that utilize city facilities, but don't pay any taxes on the maintenance and upkeep of those facilities, the pool, the rec center, any of that stuff. I know it's not easy. It's not a simple process to look into that, but I just want to encourage you to do that because there's a lot of people outside of city limits that really aren't paying their fair share, I guess, to be blunt. So anyway, that's kind of what I wanted to throw out there, even if it's like a reduced amount, because I understand they're, you know, but yeah. So I just wanted to throw that out there for something to consider, so.
So if we increase sales tax, we'd have to go to the voters. So that wouldn't, it's not short term, it would have to wait till probably
Okay.
October.
Wasn't that one of the options to increase to 6%?
Right, but not now, it would have to wait until probably in October.
Okay,
referendum.
okay,
I have a question though.
okay.
If we do increase sales tax, would you prefer like a seasonal one, like we used to have? You know, like I think before we had a 2% increase between May, June, July, and August. Or would you prefer instead like a 1% increase all 12 months to 6%? Would matter?
To me, it doesn't matter as long as you're capturing the seasonal. And I'm curious why that kind of never came back after COVID. It happened, I believe, before COVID, and then it went away because of COVID, because we didn't want
Well,
to, but it never came back.
So, I don't know if you wanna,
It started in 2023, that's when it passed.
Was it? I thought it was before.
It was
passed
repealed.
October 2023.
it was repealed by the voters, but 2 or 3 years before that, the city council
Yeah.
every year,
I think it was
in
2
1 year
years in a row
increments
that
during
they-
COVID, exempted it or
Used
repeal,
it,
whatever
yeah.
it's called.
Yeah.
So we didn't see that for about 5 years.
Yeah,
So I was just curious if you had a preference, because I think the sale, correct me if I'm wrong, guys, but I think the revenue projections between a 2% seasonal sales tax for 4 months or a 1% increase in sales tax for all 12 months, the revenue projections are pretty similar.
Nikki,
And so that's why I was curious what
Yeah.
the,
just make sure she verifies that. Nikki, can you hear me?
The 1% sales tax projection was about 1.3, and the seasonal was about 1.1 for a full year.
pretty close.
so it's close.
Yeah.
Either way, it's gonna capture, you know, I feel, you know, given the city boundary issue that I have, it would capture, you know, some of that, and the people utilizing, coming in, shopping, doing whatever, are helping, you know, it's kinda capturing that too, so. That's kind of my input. I don't know if there's any other questions.
What about property tax?
Property tax,
I mean, because that's a
the city
quick
limit issue
fix.
is where that affects me, is because we pay property taxes in city limits. A lot of our taxes go toward city services, city facilities, maintenance, et cetera. And that goes back to my first comment about the people outside of city limits using the facilities that the city maintains, you know, partially probably using our property tax monies, right? So, yeah, I'm not a big proponent of increasing property tax in the city limits, because that's just gonna affect the people that are within the existing city limits, and kinda goes against what I was pushing,
So
what
if
I'm
we had to choose.
recommending, I guess.
You'd probably prefer a sales tax.
I would,
increase.
because it's the only fair way to capture everybody. In my mind, so. Interesting. Yeah.
That's all the questions I had.
Okay,
Thank you.
all right, thanks.
Stick around there, you may have more comments as we go through this.
It's Friday on Memorial Day weekend.
Happy Friday, everybody. I just want to verify that you're in receipt of the email letter I sent to the council 3 days ago about eliminating property tax altogether. And that takes care of problems of inequalities that we face in our community, from people out of town not paying tax, people in town maybe overtaxed, and this eliminates all of that. And it creates a larger net, and it is fair for everybody. And if you're in receipt of the letter, then I think it speaks for itself, so I don't have anything to add at this time.
What was your suggested rate? I can't remember, was it like 9?
So the suggestion floats the idea for you to debate the rate, okay? Now,
Oh,
at 8.5, right, I'm not gonna
come on,
do your job for
take a
you.
stand here, man.
We're paying you big bucks for these decisions, right?
I'm teasing.
At 8.5% rate, sales tax rate, and 0 property tax, the city sees an increase of revenue of about $500,000. If you go to a 9.5% rate of sales tax and still no property tax, the city sees an additional $2 million annually of revenue. And from the proposals that I saw a couple nights ago, it appears that mine is the only one that funds all of the city departments' requests for funding. All the rest fall short. But more importantly than that is it's fair and it reduces the burden on the residents of Nome. And that's important.
So if I were to take the opposite, perspective, I would say,
Sure.
well, an increase, and a very significant increase in sales tax like that would most likely have, it would decrease the amount of money that would be spent here, because it would create an incentive to buy your stuff elsewhere and to bring it in.
Well,
Whether or not
Sure.
it's captured by the remote sales tax.
doesn't the
because I
city
think
have
there'd be a
ways to-
significant decrease in discretionary spending
Sure.
in the community.
So,
So-
am I wrong in thinking the city has ways to capture outside spending that comes in?
Like through the remote?
Like
seller
through
sales tax?
Amazon? Sorry?
Remote sales tax.
You're talking
Right.
about the Amazon tax. the
Amazon?
sales tax.
And then if things are brought through the port, are those captured at like a port tariff level? Like construction materials?
I think the shippers, like the carriers are charged a handling fee, basically.
Okay, so that gets captured if it comes in through the port. So there's two sides to that, and I'm glad you took the opposite side. Clearly, the more something is taxed, the less it tends to spend. Okay, now,
Exactly.
to offset that, if every resident in Nome started paying 0 property tax, whether it be through a rent reduction if you're a tenant or if you're an owner, that's a couple $1,000s extra each person has per year to spend. So you may actually see spending rise. And so you may see an unpredicted amount of sales tax come in higher than what you projected.
But as a landlord, and I know you know this very well, that property tax is oftentimes a fairly small percentage of the total cost that you spend to maintain a rental property.
I've calculated that out to $200 per.
Fuel, sales tax,
Per tenant.
utilities, maintenance,
Right.
all those things. And those are all gonna be subject to a much higher sales tax as a result, most likely offsetting, more than 100% the reduction in your cost of property tax.
So my projections are, the average tenant in Nome spends about $200 rent per month to satisfy their landlord's property tax obligation. And it's a substantial amount, because that's $2,400 a year. That's a lot of money for somebody.
So if it goes to all sales tax, they might spend $300 a month to offset your cost of maintaining that property because of a 3 to 4% increase in the sales tax.
Well,
I'm just taking the
sure,
other side of the
so,
argument.
so landlords are taxed on services such as purchasing lumber well, actually, there's an exemption right now with
If you
the,
got a building permit.
with permit, but I would suggest you take that exemption away and not exempt
Sure.
building materials if there's no property tax, right?
Sure.
And just capture that with the sales tax. But, yeah, so landlords have sales tax obligations, but this is more focused towards the community at large, not towards landlords. Because there's a lot of people suffering right now from property tax, in a big way.
Absolutely agree with you. Absolutely agree.
Maybe not us in this room, but there's a lot of hardship. And there's people that lose their homes because they can't afford the tax. And they fall behind on their payments. And then their home gets taken from them. And this would alleviate 100% of that.
And I don't disagree with you. The only thing I was pointing out is the reduction in property taxes that you're that's your goal. There's going to be an offsetting increase elsewhere.
Yeah, so the
Because
goal
the
is
city
not,
still has to provide services, and those costs are just gonna be manifested in a different place in a different way.
sure.
That's all.
My actual goal is just to spread the net wider. Okay, it's not to focus on, it just happens to be called a property tax. But the goal is just we need some help in our community. Costs are high. We can't fund the city needs, from what I'm hearing, properly without drilling another hole in the bottom of the boat to try to get the water to leak out, right? By increasing property taxes. It doesn't seem like that works because it's not encouraging investment, and therefore there's less activity. If you had a sales tax only approach, then the city gets to prosper during times that the town is doing well. And they get to enjoy that. And when the town is not doing well, that's when the city needs to and should tighten its belt a little bit to follow. So it kind of automatically, with the ebbs and flows of the tide, it kind of automatically adjusts the budget for the city. So it's kind of a nice feature.
Yeah, I don't disagree with anything you're saying.
Right.
There's always sort of the other side,
Sure, and so
the impact.
I would encourage you to poke holes in it and
Some would
see.
say that it's an increased sales tax is regressive in nature,
Well, I've seen that, but
because that's
since,
going to impact to a greater extent lower
Right.
income individuals that may not have the options of owning property.
now you did read in my letter that I pointed out that welfare SNAP programs are tax exempt.
As long as you create a bunch of exemptions, which is going to reduce the
Well,
revenue.
it's mandated, it's tax exempt,
Yeah.
right? We can't control that. And so they're not in proportionally hit hard with this. Matter of fact, they won't pay any sales tax for food items that are on that list of exempt sales tax items.
Maggie?
I did want to add, though, that to qualify for those programs,
Uh-huh.
they go off of a rate much closer to Anchorage. So we have people in our community who are still low income for living in an area like ours, but they make too much to qualify for those programs. So
Yes.
I think I would kind of
Right.
agree with Scott, was that even if you do qualify for those programs, we still have a large percent of our community who is, who doesn't meet that criteria, but they are still low income. And so,
Exactly,
like-
that's the hardest hit population.
And
right?
that's his
The
point.
population
So,
that's not receiving benefits, and they have enough income to where they can't qualify, but not enough to where they have disposable income. And that's where, as we know, there's a housing crisis in Nome. There has been for quite some time. There's been different ideas floated, or there's been different requests to the public, hey, what can we do to help this? This is one step in a direction to help the housing costs, and that population, most of them are renters. And so this directly benefits them. All we have to do is ask Scott to offer to lower the rent for everybody $200 if this passes, and
Sure.
And
Hearing
we'll
aids aren't
follow.
working very well here.
I can write it down for you.
Yeah.
Senior letter last week, and it was passed around to the council, just, the city manager did, and it was available for the public as well. I know that,
It was Tuesday.
Tuesday,
No,
last
this
week
week.
Tuesday.
This week.
This week.
right? Seems like a long
3
time
weeks ago
ago.
on Tuesday. I know that the city of Bethel and the city of Kotzebue, neither one of them pay property tax. So I pulled their budgets to see how it is that they're making their cities run. And also looked at their tax rates, especially Bethel, because Bethel's closer to, I mean, it's a little bit larger than Nome. I think they have like 6,500 people versus our less than 4,000. But they have a budget of 14.7. And we have a budget of 18,000, and they also fund their fire department. They have a funded fire department, which we don't have, but they have police, fire, roads. So, and I didn't get a chance to really do a deep dive. But the other thing I found amongst those is that they are both considered second-class cities, and Nome is a first-class city.
They don't pay for their schools.
Yeah, the school is a big one. But one thing they're able to do is some additional, they do some additional so-called sin taxes that we don't have, and I know that's been suggested too. And I don't know I think you did reach out to the attorney about that as well.
It's doable, it's not doable overnight, but
Yeah.
it's something we could do.
Okay.
What type of tax is that now?
Well, they call them sin taxes, but.
Oh,
basically
sin, I'm sorry.
Tobacco
I couldn't
tax,
hear you.
tobacco
Right.
tax, alcohol tax, marijuana tax.
Sure.
And Bethel has a 6% for all sales and services, and then they have 12% for transient lodging, basically hotel tax, 15% for alcohol, 15% for marijuana.
Sure. And so those options are always still available if you've followed the proposal I put forward. The thing that I would want to caution the council is if you say, hey, we've decided this is a good idea, let's go this route, even though we weren't really used to making rapid changes like this, I would like to see you put forward an amendment that the council cannot raise property rates above zero without a vote of the people, just like the sales tax. Or else it's not fair to your decision-making process if one, like we have right now, right? Right now you can raise property tax, and if that's the only choice you feel like you have, you might walk out of the room with your head down low, wishing you hadn't, but that's the only choice you have. You don't want to continue being boxed into where there's only one choice you can make, and the choice is how much. That way they're both on equal playing fields.
Just for the council, on your packet, Dan pulled some information yesterday or today. It's item M102, and it does the comparison of your sales tax, looking at all these communities, and we've been hunting every corner for data. So that's just interesting. I know there's sometimes not apples to apples, but like the school issue, so.
I appreciate your feedback. It's really good. I just like debating with you, so.
You like the what?
I like debating with you. so-
Yeah, no, I just wish I wasn't standing here as a property owner, because it'd be easier for me to sell this to you. Because my coming forward, I hadn't done any calculations on my own business. But I'm seeing, I know individuals, last tax season, property tax season, they had to refinance their car to pay the city tax on the house that they own. What's gonna happen this year to that person?
I don't disagree with you at all.
The elders, seniors get $150,000 waived of property value for property tax. Well, I think that was put in 1986. The laws haven't kept up with reality,
With the valuations.
with the valuation, right?
That's a fair point.
And so,
That's a fair point.
so here we are. We're trying to find solutions, and I wanted to put one forward
No, that's good.
that I want you to seriously consider. Thank you.
Thank you. Stick around, or I have a little bit more to chew on.
Okay, if you have questions, you can call me up.
Anybody else that would like to speak to the budget?
Can I just do a quick?
Long as it's about the budget.
It is.
So, Brad Sosky, I'm deputy clerk here, and I just want to go comment on Dave's. I agree.
I'm sorry, I did not introduce myself, for the record.
Sorry.
For the record, where we at here? Doug Doherty, engaged citizen. Okay, thank you.
With the spending it on the outside entities, so like Amazon and that, yes, we can receive money in from different areas, but people that do a lot of buying at Costco, I think that will probably increase a lot if we raise our sales tax, and that's not money we're gonna get back in here in town, so. Just
Ordered from Costco yesterday and I was charged sales tax.
to ship here? Okay, but if you buy it in Anchorage, we're not gonna get it here. And you like to debate too, so that's it, just a quick little comment, and I'm not saying I'm disagreeing, just saying.
Well, I agree that it's a good thing to think about, but it's not something for this year, because we can't, you know, I mean, it's a good idea and it's something to think about for next time around, but we can't bank on it, because we can't,
That's a longer term.
it's longer term, because we can't, it's October until we can put it up to the voters, so we gotta
What about a
think
bed
now.
Are we through the comments?
No, there's more
Anybody
people,
else?
yeah, I was just putting that out there, so we remember.
I know, I've talked to other people about what you just said too, and their suggestion was to pass what we need to pass to generate the budget this year, and there may be a duplication, if the voters would vote on something one way or the other in November, there may, like, for instance, if we have the property tax, which we have to bank on some of it this year, because we don't know what the sales tax vote will be, that they're This was a proponent, it wasn't Doug, this is somebody else that I met on my wife's coffee porch that said, hey, I saw that idea, I like that idea. I said, yeah, but I said the same thing, you can't, it's difficult to bank on because the voters have to vote on it. And he says, well, just do what you need to do this year, put it up to vote. And I'm sure that somebody, if they knew that our idea is that we're gonna either reduce or eliminate property tax, that they would understand that and be good for 1 year while we were doing that transition. That was their comment anyway. So, Mr. City Manager, did you want to go ahead and carry on with some of the agenda items?
Can I ask a question?
Sure.
So one of the most common questions that I've gotten from voters in the last month or two is, why are we in the position that we're in right now? Why are we having all of these discussions and talking about budget cuts and deficit spending? And it's a really good question. Because if we're gonna craft a solution, don't we kind of have to understand what caused this? And I'm just curious if, you know, other members of the council, what their thoughts are in terms of why we're in the situation that we're in. Anybody else want to venture a guess?
I have a personal opinion, which I'll state.
No,
Yeah.
I guess before we move on, I guess I need to understand something a little more here, and part of my feelings about the city limit thing, there's a lot of students that go to school at Nome Public Schools, at Belts, middle school, high school, they're outside of city limits. I understand there may be some sort of a base allocation that goes to Bering Strait School District and then gets passed on to Nome Public Schools for all those students that are outside the city limits. But are we getting all of that? I don't know. Maybe that's a question for Jamie. That kind of plays into my boundary question, I guess. Are we getting all of the student allocation from the state for those kids that are outside of city limits? Or are we getting a portion of it? And if you expand the boundaries, do we get all of it? You know.
So the schools are funded largely by attendance,
Yeah.
right? Doesn't matter whether you live inside city limits or outside city limits, right? if,
Yeah.
you know, so it's the same, at least in terms of state funding. And really, it doesn't affect city funding either. It's really based on attendance and the, whatever that acronym is for what.
I don't think so.
Okay.
Because
I think it's based on
our-
enrollment,
yeah,
isn't it?
It's based on our tax rolls. It's a percentage, we have to contribute at least 2.4%.
It's the minimum.
Exactly.
But we don't look at, okay, we have so many students outside of city limits, we have so many students inside of city limits, and that's gonna affect what we contribute. That's not it at all,
Okay.
right?
The superintendent.
That's what I don't
is
know.
It's based on
online.
attendance.
Jamie?
Lee, if you'd like me to address that, so first of all, we are funded on, as I believe it was Stan or Scott that spoke, but yes, the term is ADM, average daily membership. And so we are funded based on students that are enrolled and attending our schools. So if we have students that are outside the city limits, that does not matter when it comes to what number goes into the calculation for the base student allocation. As far as the calculation of the minimum and the maximum that the city must and can contribute, that is based on the value of taxable property within the city's limits.
And that doesn't include the students living outside city limits.
That is correct. If we have individuals that
Oh,
are
is that
residing
what you
on
mean?
property that
Oh,
is
okay.
not considered as taxable by the city, that valuation does not go into the calculation of the minimum and the maximum. However, it does not impact the BSA as long as they're actually attending our schools and enrolled in our schools. It doesn't matter where they are residing.
But it does impact the city's, potentially impact the city's contribution to the school. Because if you're
That
not
is
getting,
correct.
if you're not getting funding from the people outside of city limits, it limits how much you can contribute to the school.
Right, they take the taxable assessed value of the property in city limits.
That's only based on state
and it's-
funding.
And I think the minimum is like 2.65 mils
Okay.
of that amount. So we historically funded, you know, $1.5 to $2 million
Yeah.
above the minimum. Is that right? Maybe a little less than that, a couple $1 million more.
That
than
is correct. That is correct.
So we'd if we were
for
down real
example,
close
yeah.
to the minimum in terms of what we
Yeah.
typically fund, and then we expanded city limits, annexation or whatever, and increased that, potentially that would require us to fund more at the city level,
Yeah.
but most
We
likely.
already do that. But we already do above what, we probably do above what.
Way above that.
Yeah.
It's like 1.
That is correct. Currently, last year, I believe the city funded, it was around 89% of the cap, so 89% of the maximum. It would technically be, if we got flat funded from the city for this year, the 3.4 million that was requested, actually be a little less and drop it back down to about 85%.
But then you see my disconnect there is us taxpayers in city limits are
Yep.
funding that. The ones outside of city limits, nothing. So. And then I just wanted to add to my comments before. I understand, and my comment of annexation or whatever is a little more complicated than just going out there and doing it, because the city's got to weigh, you know, what you're gonna get out of it versus what you're gonna have to provide, right? You're gonna have to do more snow removal or whatever. You're gonna have to provide more services, and I don't know what, if that's even worth it, but anyway.
That's typically the argument
Yeah.
against annexation.
Yeah.
Is it costs
And that's
more
just
than-
something you guys have to kind of weigh and see if it's even worth it, right? So, anyway,
We have to do cost analysis.
Yeah.
Sometimes you find out in annexation. we
maybe not be worth it, yeah.
can't- Yeah, sometimes.
I agree. So that was kind of the context behind, I understand it's not as simple as just doing it, so, anyway.
So state roads in town get plowed by the state, right?
Ye-
For the
yes.
most part.
So, yes, the
Yeah.
state does the state roads in town.
So if we expanded our boundaries outside of town and they were on state roads, wouldn't the state still have to maintain those roads?
Yes, but the state would have to change their priorities, because there's times when Beaver Road takes 3 or 4 days before they plow it.
They'd wind up negotiating with us. They want to drop some of the service, that's typical.
But then you
Take it over.
would, you would potentially be responsible for plowing the roads at Banner Creek and Osborne and wherever, Newton, so,
And the buses
anyway.
have to go out there every day.
So, yep. Snake River. Okay, anyway, just a little bit more.
Again, something to think about for future. Not this
That's
year.
what I'm trying to-
It's on the menu.
So I'm just curious, so I'll just go, oh,
Do we have a list of what taxes we can do now and what we can do later? Like, is a bed tax going to require voting? Like what, just to keep the discussion kind of moving forward, like what can we do now? What did we hear back from Hugo?
Is property tax, the sales tax, and even with the set, obviously you have to have a referendum. Right now, your quickest is the meal. I mean, that's the one you can by resolution and it's tomorrow. But sales tax seems to be popular. So, you know, as an alternative or a mix thereof. Bed tax, all those things are there. But you would need, and there's been recommendations from some council members to look at those. So those are doable in this year, at least half the year.
If the voters vote, you do have to take the bed
Yes.
tax to the voters and the sales tax to the voters. Both those have to go in front of the voters to pass that,
so
Every tax.
not property tax.
Yeah, that's the only thing we can.
Other than property tax.
What about the alcohol and tobacco tax and all that? That has to go to the voters too?
Yes.
Yes. I still don't like it called the sin tax because I don't want to call all of us sinners, but, you know, but that, it would have to go.
can I ask Nikki a couple questions?
Go ahead.
Nikki, you're on the line, right?
I'm here.
So again, back to the question of why we're having these discussions about deficit spending and increased taxes and so forth. What was the first year we started deficit spending for the general fund budget? Was it FY '23? Pretty sure it was. We've basically deficit spent for the last 3
She's
years.
looking, yeah.
Yeah, so I think and she can confirm that.
We were, you know, F-22, we used about a $500,000,
Okay.
F-23, 1.2 million,
Oh, you're
F-24,
right, 'cause
1.
we're still in FY '25.
Yeah.
Okay, yeah, so you're right. And what also happened that year that significantly affected the revenue of the city? For, I think it was that year.
Cameron was elected.
It all went to, no, I'm kidding.
I was gonna say that about Scott.
You had the storm, that was in what year?
What year did we repeal the seasonal sales tax?
When was that, Nikki?
Hang on 1 second.
It's
I had
either, it's either,
I had it in the
It's a
last
combination
packet.
of things.
it's either gonna be 2022 or 2023, one of those, right?
Well, we also exempted it.
Just hear me out.
All right, you got it.
For the last 3 years, we've deficit spent. If my math is right, and again, Nick, you'll correct me if I'm wrong, in the last 3 years, we've basically dipped into our savings account because our spending was exceeding the revenue we're bringing in by about $3.3 million. If you look at the deficits in '22, '23, and '24. One of the most interesting pieces of data that Nikki, I think it was Nikki provided, I think it was in the previous work session, was comparing what our actual sales tax revenue was in '22, '23, and '24. And then right next to it, it was in an Excel spreadsheet. She showed what we would have made in terms of sales tax revenue if we had kept the seasonal sales tax increase. Any guesses what that number would have been in terms of lost sales revenue by repealing that seasonal sales tax?
Probably the same amount we spent on.
$3.3 million. Almost, it's within, if I read it correctly, within $100,000 difference between the amount of we've deficit spent in the last 3 years compared to the lost sales revenue the city would have generated if it had not repealed the 2% seasonal sales tax. Think it's just a coincidence?
No.
Yes. No. I mean, I'm not saying that's the only cause, but That's a huge primary factor. We got rid of the seasonal sales tax, and at the time, it was supported. I mean, the community voted to get rid of it. And I think there was a number of reasons why. One, it was pretty challenging to deal with administratively because of the changes several times a year, and from 5% to 7%, and then back down to 5% a few months later. I think there was some, as I recall, a lot of discussions about the increasing remote seller sales tax will offset that difference. And I think at the last year we had it, we're looking at about 600,000. So it replaced about 50% of that lost income. At the same time, our expenses have dramatically increased. And as we talked about in previous work sessions, it's primarily because of increased staff personnel costs. We're trying to keep our employees in their jobs so that they can provide the city services that, you know, our residents demand. And they've got some pretty extraordinary wage inflation that's happening, competition for skilled workers, all of that. You know, we haven't really dramatically increased the number of employees we've had, but we've had to increase their compensation simply to keep them. You know, and unfortunately, that all has been going on the last 2 or 3 years while we've essentially limited our revenue by getting rid of the seasonal sales tax. So in my mind, I'm not saying, you know, one tax is better than another or even preferred, but when you just look at the numbers and kind of get away from the sort of the emotional parts of it or the political parts of it, it seems pretty clear to me that once we got rid of that seasonal sales tax, our deficit spending started. I'd love it if somebody were to correct me and say I'm wrong about that, but that's what it appears to me. Again, just looking at the numbers, what's the solution?
I'm going back to your question, whether I would prefer a seasonal or a year-round, like a smaller increase year-round or
A 1%.
a larger seasonal. I would almost prefer a smaller year-round, then vendors don't have to change their systems. That's an expense, right? When your accounting team has to go in and change in October and then change it back in May and do, you know, change, and the city has to deal with changes, and that's all an expense. So if it was just one across the board, you do it and it's done, and hopefully that keeps, you know, prices down, because any additional expense to deal with that is gonna just go to the consumer.
So I've been driving everybody crazy in my workplace, just asking, what would you prefer?
Yeah, so I guess I would.
From the
to answer your
business
question-
standpoint, the folks that are, you know, like our controllers and people that are, you know, and business owners, they like the flat,
Yep.
the 6% all year round. Guess what? Every single homeowner and voter said that they wanted. They wanted a seasonal sales tax because they actually manage their spending. I remember a lot of people would fill their fuel tank like on April, you know, 29th, and they would say, I don't want any more fuel until September.
Yeah.
So they manage their spending to, you know, so.
Yeah, so there's pros and cons
So
of each.
I think that's really good information, at least for me, in terms of, you know, what some potential solutions are. So. Do you agree? Because we've had a lot of discussions about
Yeah, I
this.
know, regarding the city revenues, I did a study and the city revenues went up, irregardless, the seasonal sales tax went up about the rate of inflation. That we gained more revenues over a 5-year period, similar to the rate of inflation, but our expenses went up beyond the rate of inflation. Not every department, but about 3 or 4 key departments, and those departments then raised that gap, basically.
I looked at those same 3 years.
Right.
Our revenue, even with the repealed seasonal sales tax, our revenue went up over those 3 years about 15%. Our expenses went up about 30%.
Right.
So about twice as fast. And again, most of it's because of the extraordinary wage inflation that's occurring as people compete for employees of, you know, in all industries. You know, it's and the city has to do that, you know. So, I mean, in my mind, I hate taxes, I do, But I think if we're looking to kind of solve the problem that got us into this situation in the first place, it seems to be a reduction in the sales tax revenue. You know, but that's not gonna solve the whole problem, right? It's only gonna solve half the problem. Because I think we've projected what? About 1 million, 1.1 million in additional revenue if we go either with a seasonal sales tax or a year-round increase. Right, Nikki? About 1.1, 1.3 million?
Yeah, 1.3 for the 1% and 1.1 for the seasonal, but you won't get those full amounts in this first 26 year.
Right. Yeah, absolutely. We'd have to wait till October, and that's assuming voters would approve.
Right.
Right. But that doesn't get us out of the, out of the woods yet, right? Because we've got, what's the amount of our deficit? At least based on the last draft that came through, not including the 10% exercise. About 2 million, right? 2.2, 2.3?
About 2, I will say, yeah, 2.2, yeah.
So the sales tax, even if we were to increase sales taxes, it would only solve 50% of the problem, right? At least for this year.
And this year, obviously, the other side is, we reduce expenditures. And that's what we've been doing and looking at that, but also like open positions. And Nikki, correct me if I'm wrong, we really didn't have as many open positions to do a freeze at first than we thought, correct?
Correct, plus we've deleted positions in the last draft.
Yeah.
So basically, if we've got a $2 million problem, an increased sales tax is only gonna solve roughly half of that.
That's correct.
Increase of 1%.
Either a 1% or a 2% seasonal increase, whichever, pick your poison, whichever you want.
You're still staring at.
But we're still staring at $1 million
$1 million.
deficit. And understanding there's a timing issue with if there's an October election.
If it was a seasonal sales tax, it would depend on what months the seasonal tax was actually enacted, because the fiscal year falls right in the middle of that season.
Sure.
And so at best, you started if it starts in June, you get 1 month of that seasonal sales tax for FY '26.
Yes.
You start in
That's a
May,
good
you
point.
get 2 months.
That's a good point.
And so it's quite a bit less if it's a
the
seasonal
first
sales
fiscal
tax
year.
versus
For the first one.
6%,
Yeah.
which hypothetically could take effect in as early as November.
Great.
We'd have to get it on in a referendum pretty quick, but that's possible. Worst case, December, and if we were lazy about it, then January. But I think we could get it at a minimum December.
So if we can make about 1.1 or 1.2 or 1.3 in increased sales tax, how do we fix the other half of that deficit?
Well, if you remember, even in the last option that we gave you with the 13 meals and 6%, we still said that, didn't like it, but we could go in for another $500,000 out of, reserve that we thought would be safe. Don't like doing it, but there are a couple funds that we could, though not preferred. And then you're looking at cuts.
The one consistent theme I heard at the work session the other day is everybody's in this together, and there was concern about, wanting everybody to sort of feel that pain or share in the cost reductions or whatever. And I heard it from Nome Public Schools, especially with the first budget iteration, where, they were at the statutory minimum, and I think it was like a $2 million reduction from previous funding.
Yes.
And they were like, no way, and I don't think anybody is seriously thinking that's a good idea. And I heard it the other night from city employees that, as they're looking at the impact in their departments, in terms of, okay, if we reduce this, we can't provide essential city services, whether it's public works, police department, whatever. I'm just gonna throw an idea out here, and if there's about $1 million left to sort of fix or reduce our budget by to get a solution, what about splitting that equally between the city of Nome and Nome Public Schools? That burden. And again, it's just an idea. 500,000 City of Nome reduces that, whether it's through a reduction of costs in terms of reducing operating hours of parts of the city, hiring freeze, travel freeze, sort of, seasonal closures of buildings. I don't know if that would save any money, but just kind of pretty much leaving it to the administration to figure out where another $500,000 reductions in general fund expenses would come from. And we look at least for this year, a similar reduction in Nome Public Schools for another $500,000, understanding they're not gonna be happy about that at all, and hopefully that will be short-lived, and they're able to, withdraw that from their savings, their apartment fund. I think that was sort of where the school board was looking at reducing or bridging the gap if they needed to, based on prior discussions. Hopefully we get a sales tax increase in there come October, and then we can sort of, with the activity at the port and the increased construction activity and all that, hopefully that will. And in the meantime, we can start looking at longer term solutions, whether it's, we've talked about the fuel tariff, we've talked about removing some other exemptions from the sales tax or the property tax codes as a longer term solution.
If it's appropriate, Megan and I have talked a lot about collaborations with organizations here who appear will sit down with us about cost sharing of roads and infrastructure, and are willing to sit down and talk, but there's stuff out there.
Yeah, that's a longer term.
Exactly, but we put it on that menu and begin those
Government to
talks right now.
The government to government.
Yeah. So there's a lot of options for long term.
Sorry, I didn't mean to sort of monopolize the conversation. I wanted to get that idea out there. Nome Public Schools, City of Nome, and the taxpayers all sort of sharing in that burden together. I don't think that taxpayers are gonna be excited about increasing sales taxes unless they see a meaningful reduction in city expenditures. I'm a voter, and I would wanna see that too. I don't think it's reasonable to expect this $2 million deficit to be bridged simply by cutting city or services or education funding. This way, sort of all three of those, interested parties, that are all affected, sort of share in that burden, so. I hate it when nobody says anything.
Everybody's thinking.
I think you say enough for all of us. You have really
You
good
could
points.
just kick me
You
under
have
the
really good
table.
points.
Maggie said
It's
it.
not a
Kick me
dig,
under
it's
the
not a
table and
No.
say, shut up, Scott.
No. I think you bring up a lot of different points. I had a question for Jamie really quickly. During one of your presentations, you had mentioned a percentage of students that are now homeschooling. Can you remind me of that percentage of the total student population that are now homeschooling?
So we have approximately 30 students now on average out of about 650 total that are homeschooled. I haven't sat down, I have to pull up my calculator and figure out that average. So that has increased since over about the past 9 years that I've been here in the district. When I first came, it was around anywhere between 50 to 20 students annually, and now it's between 25 to 30 students annually. The number does fluctuate a little bit over the course of the year.
I wanted to ask that because I think that is a roughly like 22% of our student population that is not attending our public facilities. And
No, if we have about 65 kids, then you are talking about 5%.
you said
30 is about 5% of 650.
okay. I'm kind of wondering what adjustments the school is making to, at least attempt to bring that population back. I think that that's a lot of students for a community as small as ours. And I know there might be different factors into that, but I think, you know, if there are less students in the classroom, I feel like there might be ways that we can, like Scott is saying, kind of help with this cost share, especially if we're not changing anything that we're doing within our school systems to get kids to want to come back to school. And
Well,
actually
to some extent, you know, we're going to choose homeschooling no matter what we do, because that is just a philosophical choice. We have some families that have been homeschooling ever since, all of their children, ever since, and some of these are long-term residents of Nome. We have some families that try the program because their students are maybe struggling, what they feel their students are struggling in a setting, and we have been doing some things. We have the ANSEP Acceleration Academy that's going to be opening this coming fall. We're developing a CTE-oriented pathways program for students, working along with the side with NACTech to try to provide opportunities for students that are more interested in vocational studies. So the school district is working towards trying to do a better job to attract some families back, if you will. We have about 9 students total that live within the city district boundaries that attend programs that are not non-public schools, but I think that speaks to that are in a different homeschooling program, because many of the homeschooling programs in the state of Alaska are called statewide, which means students anywhere in the state of Alaska can enroll in those programs. But that's really a tiny number, which I think says that we would rather have them, if they're going to choose to homeschool, we would rather have them in our homeschooling program and receiving the funding for those students, as opposed to that funding going to a different school district. So, you know, the school, we're aware that we have some increases in homeschooling, and we are trying to bring in some programs that we hope may attract some of those families to come back into the brick and mortar enrollment status. So there are some things that we are doing, but it may take some time to see if they make any impact. Yeah, and I did have my hand up because there was something that I would like to say to the council in response to, and I'm sorry, I can't tell who spoke it, about spreading the
Who's Scott?
Spreading the budget shortfall around. Scott, okay. I thought it might be. Scott, all I would say is that, you know, I appreciate your statement, and, you know, I understand that, you know, there is some conversations about, you know, I know you guys have to figure out how to not deficit spend. Be aware that, you know, that the schools have been facing what you guys have been facing for a decade. We have been facing when our revenue, in this case, our revenues are flat and our expenses are increasing. And we've gotten a little bump here or there, depending on when we look over the last 10 years. And we have been cutting and cutting. And we're at the point, just so you're aware, House Bill 57 was passed, vetoed, veto was overridden. However, we are still facing a fairly significant concern districts-wide because Governor Dunleavy has not received the operating budget. And once he receives the operating budget, which will occur next month, then he has time to go through and line item or partially line item veto. Now, if he may choose to do that. In fact, he has stated that he would do that if he didn't receive all of the school reforms that he wanted. Now, House Bill 57 was a compromise package with the legislators on both sides of the aisle, and it did incorporate some of the education changes that the governor did want. However, if the governor chooses to partially line item veto either all of the $700 increase to the BSA or more, which he could statutorily do, it would be a little kind of historic because no governor has ever line itemed below the statutory increase in the BSA. But if he chooses to do so, that means the school district will not receive that increase to the BSA
Yep, understand that.
until the legislature comes back into session, and they might or might not override, which would mean in that case, we would have nothing left in we do not have the reserves to absorb both a $500,000 cut from the city and the potential complete loss of the $700 BSA. Even if we do that, even if he chooses to do that and we come in, we have to survive on our cash flow and what we have available until a potential veto override as well. So, and if we don't have the cash flow, then we're going to have to make some really ugly, hard stops to avoid not being able to make payroll. So that would mean we would probably have to put a complete kibosh on all no funding for student travel except that which was fundraised. So you're going to have to tell the parents that I hope you guys aren't really too excited about much of the cross country, a volleyball, and potentially wrestling season. I mean, those would all be significantly impacted. So we're just, in a very, we're staring down probably the most significant uncertainty that we have seen in the decade or more when it comes to school funding. And I will state that if the conversation from the city is, we're going to cut your budget by $500,000, so you have into some reserves to pay for it, I would say that I think the city needs to have a discussion about, if the city's made decisions to get themselves into this pickle, then I think the city will have to have a conversation about maybe we will have to pull a little bit out of our reserves, because you're also expecting us, the school district, to pull out of our reserves to help pay for the cut that you're discussing potentially passing on to us. So that's all I'll state. I mean, for me, from my philosophical perspective, one of the first things I told Mr. Smith when we met was, I do not know why the city ever repealed the seasonal sales tax. I didn't think it was a good idea at the time because we get a great deal of income in the season from miners, tourists, cruise ships, etc. That we think that would have been a logical thing to continue to capture that for the benefit of our city. Property tax, I'll be honest, I don't pay property tax here because I don't own property here. I pay through the nose in Wasilla though. So my property tax there is very similar to what people here pay. So, I mean, I understand the paying of property taxes is all I can say. I lived in a very large metropolitan area where the sales tax, I paid $1,000 a year for sales tax on a home that's probably somewhat a little smaller than the one that I currently have in Wasilla, where I pay close to $5,000 a year now. So that's my 2 cents when it comes to that, but I really want the city council to be aware of what the school is facing and what some of the potential repercussions down the line. A lot of this is uncertain. It may not come to pass. That Dunleavy may just throw in the towel and let that sail through. And we would, if you passed on a cut onto us, we would have to figure out if there's anything left in our budget to cut. We've been cutting and cutting and cutting and cutting for probably over 5 years. We have a lot less in terms of positions in our school district and how we fund things than we used to. So that's kind of my 2 cents, but I'm open to any questions. The reason I came tonight is to be able to respond to, any questions that the city council may have about the school district budget. That's part of what I'm here for, so, thank you.
Thank you, Jamie. No, I appreciate your feedback, and you understand the funding side of it, I think, very well. I wanted to kind of respond with a couple of additional pieces of information. I think you hit the nail on the head when you said the $700 BSA that basically the legislature overturned Dunleavy's veto. From my perspective, there's a possibility that Dunleavy could veto line item some of that stuff, but as you pointed out, it is highly unlikely. I would sort of characterize the legislators checkmated Dunleavy on this, and so it's possible. And that's why I think it's important to note that the city of Nome has to make a decision on school funding by May 31st.
Correct.
However, that doesn't mean we can't change that number later, especially if, there's something with the state budget that negatively affects Nome Public Schools. So for example, if the decision of the council is to set, school funding at 500,000 less, at 2.9 million, no, 2.8, or I'm sorry, 2.9 million, and then, somehow the Dunleavy reduces the amount of funding that Nome Public Schools would receive, through some type of veto, even though we both agree it's highly unlikely, there's nothing to stop the city of Nome from coming back and saying, okay, we're gonna add an additional amount to that 2.9 million. Based on previous discussions we've had, and I think we checked with our attorney, the only restriction on the city of Nome changing that contribution, that initial contribution amount, we can't reduce it. We can add to it and we can increase it, but we can't reduce it. So I think that sort of hopefully would give Nome Public Schools a little bit of assurance that, if there's any budget uncertainty with the state budget for the schools, that we have the ability to sort of backstop that if needed. The other thing I wanted to bring up, and I didn't expect you to endorse my idea. I knew that it would be not well received, and I fully expect that. But I think it's important to note that the city of Nome for the past 3 years has dipped into its savings account every 3 years, for the last 3 years in a row, to fund our budget in part and increasing Nome Public Schools contribution. And I'm not saying you deserve way more. I wish we could give you a lot more. But the city has dipped into its savings account to the tune of $3.3 million over the last years to fund our city budget because the revenues were flatlined. And I think in one of those years, I think it was FY23, correct me if I'm wrong, Jamie, you actually had a surplus in your operating budget and were able to increase the deposit or the funding to your apartment fund. In the same year, we were deficit spending. And I'm not saying, it's smart financial, management on your part. I think that's good. But I guess my request is that Nome Public Schools, at least for this year, look into dipping into their savings account. And you and I discussed the apartment fund last work session we had, that there's about $1.1 million in there. We all wish we had a plan or a path forward for the 18-plex apartments that we've talked about for as long as I've been on the council. Unfortunately, we just don't have a plan for that. So hopefully that, if if Nome Public Schools does have to dip into that fund to cover to make the budget work, that with a $700 BSA increase that's now permanent, it will be much easier to sort of replace that amount that you've had to take this year in the future. So, I guess I just wanted to, so I think we've got some options there in terms of, working together. And it's certainly not an ideal solution, and I certainly didn't expect Nome Public Schools to endorse my idea. But I think it's, if we're gonna fix this, everybody is going to have to chip in something. Nome Public Schools, the city of Nome, And I'm gonna be asking Lee for a corresponding decrease in operating expenditures this year as well. And he's not smiling right now, but I'm doing, and I think as part of that, the voters need to see, if they're going to approve a sales tax increase, they have to see that we are putting our best foot forward too, in terms of a reduction of expenditures. So, but I appreciate your comments, Jamie, they're well received, thank you.
Ask a question. Jamie, this is Lee. Did you, and again, I wasn't here for your presentation, I've just gone through it, you know, in writing the presentation itself. Did you guys anticipate, you probably did not, I would hope, anticipate this BSA increasing, or did you leave that out in hopes that it would increase?
No, when we presented our final budget to the city, it did include, and it was based on anticipation of a $680 increase. Because what we were told by the legislature is that if House Bill 57 did not pass or did not survive, or was vetoed and could not be overturned, that they had planned on putting the equivalent of one-time funding of $680 into the budget. So our current budget is based on a $680 increase in funding based on the BSA. We're hoping that it will be permanent. So going from 680 to 700, which was the final number that was initially decided upon, that's not a huge increase in our budget to go from 680 to 700. I think that's maybe about another 25,000. So it's not like it's a huge windfall for us to go from 680 to 700. But yes, we did anticipate that increase of 680. So that is in our current budget.
Okay, thank you.
Jamie, this is Mark. I have a couple of questions for you.
Sure.
So we really appreciate the additional information you provided us in our packet. We haven't really gone through it very much, but there's a lot of information in there, and I think that's really helpful. And in fact, you did put in a balance sheet for the school operating fund in there, and Nikki can attest, and I think the accounting people prior to Nikki can always attest that I'm always bugging them about putting balance sheets in so that we can see the full picture of both sides of the coin. Did I miss it, or is there a balance sheet in there for other funds? And what, I know you have a building fund, is that the only, what other funds do you have other than the school operating fund?
Beside the school operating fund, the only additional funds, well, we have actually a couple of separate funds, but most of them we have to supplement. We have transportation. We get an amount of money from the city, but it is not sufficient to cover the amount charged by our contractor. We also have a food service fund that we also have to supplement. That's to the tune of about $250,000 a year out of our general funds. And then the other two are the capital improvement fund and the apartment fund.
Okay, and would you be able to go, so the ones that you actually keep balance sheets for would probably be the apartment fund and the CIP?
Yeah, so the CIP, we're actually in the process of making a very significant dent in that one. I believe that the balance in that fund at the beginning of this school year was just right about 3 million. However, the roof project is underway and is projected to actually get started the day after, basically a week from Monday. We expect all of the contractors, workers to start piling in. The school district, our participating share in that project is about 1.6 million. So that's going to cut our capital in by half. We also have other expenditures that tap into that fund. It's not solely for these extremely large major maintenance projects. We have other things. If we have to purchase a vehicle, it has to come out of there. So we have a replacement vehicle coming up for the oldest van in our fleet, to the tune of about $70,000 because we have to retrofit We can't purchase 15-passenger vans legally and use them for student transport, so we have to pay extra money, about $20,000, to have the thing retrofitted and certified that it doesn't have 15 seats. We have to drop down to 10. And other projects that we have, I mean, if we have pumps that go out, we have air handlers that need repairs. Some of those expenses, we do pull those out of our capital fund. So on an average year, we take out anywhere between $100,000 and $150,000 out of our capital fund just for doing projects for the school buildings, and that does not include any major maintenance projects. Besides the roof, we have received commitment to fund the generator replacement at the elementaries, at the Belts campus. And I believe that project is about $800,000 total, 30%, which must be paid by the school district. And the only way that fund is ever replenished is if we take money out of our general funds and put it in there. So if we do have years where our projected, where we get to the end and our actual expenses are lower than we actually projected and there is some type of a surplus, that's where we put that money in there. In the past, the school district has contributed anywhere between $100,000 to $200,000 a year into that fund. In the past couple of years, we have been able to unable to put any money in there. And this current year, FY24, we actually pulled $300,000 out in order for us. So the school district has also deficit spending this past year. This current year, we're pulling money out of the apartment fund. We're pulling money out of the capital fund. Next year, we're projected to pull no money out of the capital fund and $250,000 out of the apartment fund. If the city passes along a $500,000 cut, we're going to be taking $750,000 total out of that 1.1 million.
1.1 million you're referring to is in the apartment fund? That's in the
apartment fund.
That's the fund balance?
So, yeah, so that fund does replenish itself over time because rent from the apartments goes in there. But of course, we have to maintain a certain amount of reserves in the apartment fund. We have to, because if anything happens to that building where significant repairs have to be made, we cannot get any assistance from the state. We would have to turn to the city to ask for assistance or pay for it ourselves.
Okay, so on the.
So that's just, go ahead, I'm sorry.
I was gonna say, what you provided here today has the balance sheet for the school operating fund for FY 22, 23, 24, estimated 25, and estimated 26. Would you be able to give us the same balance sheet for our Tuesday meeting that has the CIP for those years as well, and also the apartment fund balance sheets?
Yes.
Okay, that'd
Yeah,
be real, I think that'd be really helpful.
I can have Genevieve put together a spreadsheet for you that shows the balance, it shows the expenditures for this school year to date. I can also have her give you some historical end of year balances for each of those, but also give you a look-see into the expenditures for FY24, especially out of the capital fund. The apartment fund, like I said, the expenditures out of that is fairly minimal, but we do pay, there is some electrical costs that we pay that charge against that every year. So there are some annual costs. If there's maintenance that's charged there, those are costs there. So I'll get you some so you can see kind of the revenue and expenditures out of for this current year for both the apartment fund and the capital fund, and then I'll get some historical balances for you for the capital and apartment fund.
I think that'd be really helpful for us to have that historic knowledge also. And remind me, we've mentioned this a few times in meetings, but we had the city contributed to a project that was a required match, and the project didn't happen or was put off. And there's did that money come back to the city coffers, or was it still with this, it did come back to the city?
We talking about the bathroom
Yeah.
project?
Yeah,
Talking about the bathroom?
So the city, in the last couple of years, the city has funded the ACSA restroom project. That was, all of that money was returned to the city. Less, of course, the 30% that was the participating share. So that 70% of that project outlay, which I think was about, I want to say close to 400,000. That was the initial outlay, and 70% of that was returned by the school district back to the city. And that's the only project that the city has funded in the last, I would say, probably the last 9 years. That's the only project that the city elected to fund itself out of its own pocket and then request to be reimbursed when the money came, if and when the state selected that project.
Okay. I do have, we're running live now on YouTube and others, so people are, I do have a email, so it's nice to know people are watching. Jamie, how much do you guys get from tribal units? I don't know how to answer that question. I have no clue. Or tribal organizations.
Right now, the funding varies from year to year. Oftentimes, there are requests that are made to fund projects or specific activities. We get some money from NSEDC. A lot of that is kind of, depending on the so for example, NSEDC has funded the elementary basketball program for many, many years. We get what is called Johnson O'Malley funding from 3 of our tribal entities. That would be Solomon Council and King Island. That's to the tune of about $23,000 a year. Other than that, we don't have a consistent annual contribution from any of our tribal or other community organizations. A lot of it is just what's requested from year to year for projects. So for example, we right now have the hospital, Norton Sound, and some of the other tribal organizations are working together to find a way to fund this ANSEP Acceleration Academy. It is not a cheap program, so we agreed to do it only under the conditions that the community find a way to make it cost neutral to the school. And so we do have a very active parent group that went out and got some commitments for that. But like I said, other than that, we do not have any specific regular commitments from any of our tribal entities or our tribal nonprofits. But there are a lot of things that just kind of come and go with specific requests, grants, etc. over the years.
Individual said thank you. That's nice.
So, unless there's any more questions about the Nome Public Schools, I'd like to sort of put Lee in the spotlight a little bit, if that's okay with you.
Sure.
We're asking Nome Public Schools to sacrifice. Are you committed to seeing if you can reduce the city's general fund budget by a similar amount without impacting the core services that the city basically is required to provide? And that's basically emergency services, police, fire, road maintenance, stuff like that. I just, putting that same pressure, I guess, on the city that we just put on Nome Public Schools.
Yeah.
What are your thoughts on that?
My first answer is yes, as long as we can maintain the core services. I will tell you, our team, they worked really hard today to look at reducing hours in places, and we've got
And I appreciate
the museum.
that.
Yeah, and they were very receptive. They were on it today.
And without laying anybody off. I don't want to
Yeah.
see.
If
any
openings
employees-
happen, we would freeze those, unless we got in a real bind, I would say, okay, board, I've got to bring, or council, I got to bring this person on, like, you know
Yeah.
what I mean?
Right.
But the core services, being able to, the same with, those outward facing services, like police, like public works, where they're out there. You know, if I lose operators and I can't run certain, then I may say, look, I may have frozen these, but I need this one. And I would come back to you and ask and show you what the impacts are. But I would say right now, based on what I've seen today and talking with Nikki and departments, I think it's doable. Plus going after the sales tax.
What kind of services would you see reduced or an impact on, you know, by taking another $500,000 out of the budget? And I'm just kind of trying to remember some of the information that we got, which was super helpful with all of the department managers earlier this week. And I remember, you know, like the rec center, they said, hey, you know, Chip was, you know, very candid, and I really appreciated his candor. He said, you know, we can probably do it, but it will, you know, probably the outcome will be reduced hours, you know, opening a little bit later, closing a little bit earlier, maybe closing more on the weekends than we currently do. Some of those, you know, I think maybe not having a program director to sort of put together a lot of the really cool programs that are run through the rec center.
Yeah.
Rec
Rec center was one of the largest to look at, reducing days of operation. We've got, you know, Cheryl's here, we've looked at, and Marguerite, there she is, and we looked at cutting hours, you know, of operation. It's not that significant, let's say somebody has said, okay, we'll just close the library and museum. Well, when you put it in mothballs, you've still gotta operate the building. It doesn't shut down. You know, and one of the examples is dehumidification. I never did that right. On documents, that's gotta run. You know, it's just it's not a small thing, it's expensive. But you've gotta do it to preserve, you know, the collection. Am I right? So there are things you have to do. But you would see potentially freezing less officers. That will happen. Nikki, what were some of the others we looked at today? We went over a lot of stuff.
Finance would probably lose a body,
Yes.
or at least part-time, you know,
And
unfilled
at a
positions.
minimum, and even in the library and in the museum, I mean, will you reduce hours enough, people are not gonna stay. And I still will go back to, and I know I hate to be the, you know, the wet blanket, I still have to deal with the issues with the union.
Right.
So that's a negotiation that's gonna have to occur.
The reason I'm asking is we're gonna have to make a decision on school funding next Tuesday before we see the final version of the operating budget, which is not due for another month. And so that's why I'm trying to see if the city council can get a level of comfort that you are going, if we're asking no public schools to take a hit, you know, are you willing to?
Yes. As long as we can maintain core services.
Right.
And, you know, and, you know, closing hours, doing things like that, shutting buildings down, you know, we're gonna get a lot of pushback, particularly if we're asking, this is the, you know, the public side.
Right.
You're gonna cut all this stuff, we're gonna give you money, but yet you're gonna close? I mean, that works into that whole sellability of it. So, you know, it's.
And hopefully this
mixed.
next year, assuming all of these things happen, we can look at some of the longer term solutions, whether it's,
Absolutely.
you know, removing some exemptions, whether it's the fuel tariff, whether it's all of the other longer term things.
And we're doing that.
we've
And
been
Ms.
talking
Miller
about.
said that
Yeah.
earlier about kind of this menu that I call it. And there are things, I will tell you, we're missing a lot of opportunity with foundations and, you know, grants. There's still some out there. The other is, and, you know, we've been talking about that with Megan and I on these collaborations to share cost on roads, do more with transportation, the Department of Transportation, the military, you know, the ports, things we've got coming. There's opportunities to cost share with industry. You know, Graphite One, I'm gonna tell you, I have never worked with a new group that were more willing to sit down and talk with us
Sure.
about help, because they said our trucks are going to diminish your road quality.
Right.
And we want to help you because, and you know, they said, look, we're making money off this.
Yeah.
We should give back to the community. And I was very glad to hear
So
that.
trying to keep the conversation focused on the short term here,
Yeah.
getting us through this sort of crisis we have now. If Nome Public Schools takes a $500,000 reduction in their contributions, if the city of Nome operating budget absorbs it through, you know, a number of different things,
Yeah.
and if the community is willing to, you know, consider a sales tax increase with the earlier projections of 1.1 to 1.3 million in additional annual revenue, knowing that that's not going to come for another 6 or 8 months,
Sure.
will that put the city operating budget in a stable position for this year?
It will begin stabilizing.
But we won't have any short term, like Nikki won't come to you and, you know, say, oh my gosh, I have this $2 million payment and I don't have the funds to do it because of the seasonal fluctuations. You should be good on that?
I don't see the big cost out there, something unexpected. I think we're doing the best we can. My worst case is particularly with Public Works or the
Like a big piece of
storms,
equipment or something?
things like that.
Okay.
But I think it's manageable.
When's the earliest, if the rest of the council agrees, when's the earliest we could see some revised projections or the second iteration of the budget or third or whatever it is? to sort of-
Tuesday's quick. We're not even open on Monday. We're gonna be doing a
No, I'm not
parade.
talking about two, yeah.
Yeah,
Another week or two?
I would say,
We don't have another week or two.
you know,
Not for the school budget, but for, I'm thinking, we're not gonna get it before
just
Tuesday
hours.
for the school budget.
Tuesday night is too close. We could do next Thursday.
Okay.
I think that will give us sufficient time to come back.
Cameron?
We're talking about something like a crisis. Wondering if we could call a special election to increase the sales tax. So we're not having that uncertainty coming for 6 months. We know about it now, we're gonna plan for it after that election.
You wouldn't be able to get it in before the end of June.
Yeah, but what
Oh,
about?
that's totally
what about-
fine.
What are you
what
saying?
about- He's saying that rather than wait until November, can we call a special election, say in July or?
Right, in July.
Whatever
Oh, we're
spot
talking
it's-
to get it in as quickly as possible based on what the law will allow. If we can get it in July, let's roll with
But I
July.
think when I was
Yeah.
looking at the code, it was like 30 days notice.
30, Dan, can you speak to that anymore? I don't, we've mentioned it, the
The
attorney mentioned it, but
logistics of actually setting it up is, in reality, is longer than that. And so, I mean, you're talking
60
about
days?
printing out, dollar.
360 ballots. That's generally what's been voting.
Well, but
I'm just saying,
you
that's
still
the,
gotta push it through the printers. You gotta, in order for the tabulator to actually tabulate it, you have to send it to the programmers in order to set up that. And you have to have all the information already put into place, but the ordinance takes at least 2 readings
that's the,
before you can put in the referendum. So that's 1 month there at the very least.
between 60 and 90 days.
So you're thinking, you're trying to get it earlier, 2 or 3 months
So
sooner.
I
Right.
don't know how we could
offset
do
the
it
fiscal.
faster than
Right.
60, is what I'm saying.
Well,
You can do it, special, you can have a special, yeah.
We can
Yeah.
certainly try.
I think that's a good
Yes.
idea.
You know, to be honest, the city's still gotta make its case to the public.
Yeah.
Right.
Correct.
We still gotta convince and make it, you know, and that we're basically, you know, this is justified,
Yeah.
you know.
why don't we increase it to 7% and decrease the mill rate to
So, that was my next question. I'm gonna-
9 or
I'm
10.
gonna follow up on that. So, if we put a thing out to the voters, can we promise them that we will not raise the property tax?
You cannot put any such language in a referendum. All you can do is say, here's what it is. You cannot categorize in the referendum. You can, however, by ordinance or resolution, say, as a commission or council, You've been doing this 37 years, you have all these commissions, boards, and councils. So with the, you can put in a resolution or ordinance that says, we as a council will be spending the funds in this way. You can do that. Now, does it hold you to it? You have the ability as a council to go back and say, we're gonna have to change it. But that goes back to the public and having to sell that.
And sort of what Doug was sort of, I think, getting closer to mentioning is there's, you know, voters could always approve if that was the desire of the voters to approve a property tax cap.
Yes.
You know, I think that's a referendum required as well for something like that, where basically you say, we cannot go beyond, you know, 10 mils or 12 mils for property tax,
Yeah.
without another vote of the people to change that, so.
That's correct.
You know, so that would might,
The theory is it takes the burden off the council of having a lopsided decision-making process. Because right now, that's where you find yourself,
this
right?
limits its options. Yeah.
You can't, on your own, raise sales tax, but you could right now raise property tax, and you could change budgets, okay? So you've got one of the three legs of the bar stool that's not really at your control. And so if you did pass a referendum that says the council cannot raise property tax with this discussion without a vote of the people, then that would make it even for your decision-making process across the board. So I recommend that.
Some of
Also-
that may or may not be illegal. So we'd have to, based
Whatever
on
way, it
our
would have to
council.
be a separate issue that's decided.
You're gonna have to separate
you
it.
know, Yeah, a separate election issue or
Yeah.
something.
And lastly,
I just didn't want you to think we, you know, forgot about that.
no, it's great. But lastly, I wanted to point out how comfortable we are at the 7% level. No property tax is 1.5% higher. Just wanted to point that out.
I'm not comfortable with 7%.
When we had 7% in the past.
Seasonal.
That was seasonal.
When we had it seasonal in the
We've
past
never
at
had full year-round
7%.
7% sales
That's
tax,
correct.
Ever.
That's correct. When we had 7% in the past seasonally, I don't recall hearing people complain about that. I just don't have that in my memory.
It's seasonal, right?
Right.
But people, but residents in Nome altered their purchasing behavior so that it didn't impact them negatively.
They might not do so if it was year-round.
Well, there'd be no way to do it if it was year-round, and that's why, you know, in my very limited sort of canvassing of a number of folks, they were like, if I'm thinking about it from my perspective, my, you know, individual, I would like to see a seasonal one, because I can still do that. I can still stop buying fuel for 4 months, or bulk up on certain items and not
Sure,
do
it promotes gaming the system, is what you're
And the focus
saying.
of the higher sales tax rate is on visitors, non-residents. And that's the appeal of the seasonal
Sure,
sales tax.
and that's what we're trying to do is cast that net wider. But,
I think we're kind of saying the same thing.
yeah. we're
Wet
close.
blanket though is cash flow. We still have to look at our cash flow.
That's what I wanted to make sure
That we really have, to, and I'm sure Nikki's
throwing a lot
making
of
saying Lee
stuff
cash flow,
out.
because that, in doing that, we only have 1 month or something in 26. If that were to happen and you were to go to summer, my cash flow is definitely gonna suffer.
Thank you.
Oh, without a doubt, for sure.
Yeah.
But we could change the season like Dan was saying, right? So thinking about it, we start getting people in March during Iditarod. We could change that to start.
You could target that, there's no reason why you couldn't say for the month. of March.
Seasonal can be any,
Yeah,
you
so why
define
not do
one. The
March, why
council
not do the
defines
summer? Why
seasonal.
not do March to
That's an interesting.
March
idea.
to August
Yeah, we haven't discussed that.
or
That's
August?
a very interesting idea.
Yeah. Sure. It's a good idea. Another menu item.
I also think on a smaller term, I think that if we're asking, you know, the rec center to increase their costs of, like their daily admittance cost, I think that it would be reasonable to ask that the museum does the same just to kind of help offset their costs. I know it's not gonna be everything, but I think charging something at least for tourists in that same idea and that same, if that's our approach, I think having a small fee there. And then just testing it out. I mean, now we have with these real IDs or tribal IDs, like there are so many different ways that you can identify that you're a resident, either, again, at our discretion, but I think that asking programs to also, if we're gonna ask programs to increase their costs, I think that should be also fair, kind of in the same manner that Scott was talking about, you know, sharing this. If everything else is going up, I think we should have something. And then also, I think the rec should have and I've said this multiple times, I think they should have a credit card reader. So many,
It's either it's in or it will be in by next week. We're doing the square.
Yes.
thing. Yeah, we're on.
cool. Thank
That's
you.
gonna make it, I don't like people dealing in cash off-site.
Just to clarify, the rec center fees are going up?
Yeah, rec center fees going up.
I thought we had talked about that when we were at the Foster building, how they had gone up, the daily admittance.
That already happened.
Yeah,
Yeah,
like,
that's
it-
enough.
but I'm saying that it has
January
happened
1st.
recently.
Yeah, it's
yes.
already been done.
Like, I think it, you know, it has happened already, and I think that we should ask other programs who have potential. And, you know, a lot of it too, like that museum, I think, attracts a lot of people who we don't serve within city, like tourists, but tourism is a part of our economy. And museums across the country charge.
So I had the pleasure of playing tourist and going to the Whittier to visit Whittier last summer with some people from out of state. And they had a tiny little museum. It was really interesting because they had a whole section on Nome within the Whittier Museum, because there's Doolittle, or one of those guys, spent a lot of time in Whittier and spent a lot of time in Nome. So they did this whole section on Nome in there. But anyway, you walk in there, and what they do is they don't have an admittance fee. They have a $5 donation, and everybody has to basically pay. I don't know, it's probably mincing the words with what are legalities, but that's what they do. And maybe they don't charge their local people that go in there, I don't know that, but they probably know who's there because Whittier is so small. They didn't ask for ID, but they knew we were from out of town, and they said, oh, it's a $5 donation. So everybody basically pays that.
That's true. I was there last year. and-
Same place?
Yeah, and everybody's in that one big bill.
Right?
I'd like to speak to that. You guys are gonna have to talk to the tour group that does the cruise ships, because they won't even get in there in the time that they have there. They don't have all day. They have like an hour or 30 minutes. They do not have very long at the museum. So you're gonna have to get the cruise ship people to pay it if you wanna charge an admission for people to come in to the museum, if you want the cruise people to pay.
Like an excursion, let you go on a cruise on an excursion.
Yeah, I mean, you know, we're gonna have a lot of people. We can't even count them all. We have a little clicker and we're like, how many people came in? We will not have a way to pay it, and our square is not very fast. You go, admission, okay, now put your thing in, and then you have to click it a couple times. Do you want a receipt? Oh, yes, or no. It's not fast, so.
Would be a combined excursion fee.
Yeah, you're gonna have to
Yeah, I see what you mean, that
get them
it's
to.
problematic too, when you have a whole bunch of people in a short amount of time to come through a little space.
But I mean, we have birders, like it's not just the
Birders
cruise
don't
ships.
come in. Birders don't
Something
come
to
in.
talk about
They are
another night,
birding.
not Friday night, in this beautiful weather.
Yeah, birders are.
Okay, I'm not
Let's
gonna
move
argue.
on. No, I mean,
Birding all day.
I agree we should charge people, but let's not
Yeah.
worry about it tonight.
Yes.
It's not gonna save our budget.
Have we covered the short-term stuff? I mean, I just proposed one plan. Does anybody else have anything different in terms of getting us through like the next year? This next fiscal year? I mean, I've just thrown one out there, but it's just.
It offers some balance.
I think Cam mentioned about going to 7% as opposed to 6%. And we've heard from a number of people who are interested in not having their property taxes raised and would rather pay a sales tax. So that's something definitely to, I think, further discuss. We have what?
Something we could discuss later.
Yeah, not too much later. I mean, we can.
Well, before we put it on the ballot, for sure.
Right.
Yeah, I'm just talking about kind of.
Well, I'm talking about this now too, because we have to make a decision for the school funding.
What would
and
that
with-
change the school funding decision on Tuesday?
Depends of what we tell them, or what we decide. I mean, are we gonna, we need to have the sales tax discussion a little bit more, I think, in order to,
So if we've agreed generally on the plan, whether it's 6%, 7% sales tax, whether we, cap property tax, the decision we have to make on Tuesday is what's the number that we are going to fund the Nome Public Schools at least initially. Remembering we cannot lower that number, but per our attorney, we can always increase it. And 500,000 less from last year's funding is 2.9. Is that right? Got a lot of numbers in my head, so. Is that something the council, just to kind of, is that something that we're comfortable doing on Tuesday?
Yes.
You can always change your mind, but I'm just trying to get some consensus here. What do you think, Jim?
Yeah, 2.9.
Mark?
we're not gonna vote, but.
No, it's not a vote, we're just, I'm supporting
I'm trying
that.
to- I'm trying
I
to-
support that idea.
Yeah.
I don't think changing any of our fictitious, not
Projected.
fictitious, but our projected, taxes aren't gonna change what our school.
The decision is on Tuesday.
Decision is, or mine, and I agree with that, that number. I agree, I'm not voting.
Mark? Is that generally acceptable?
I would support that the school contribute into this shortage as well, by taking less.
Warren?
I don't really like going around and asking people that specific question right now, I guess.
I do.
That's what I'd say. I think we should stop that process.
Why?
Because I just don't think it's a good thing to do.
The community is kind of anticipating, we have people here,
It's a-
we have
it's a
people
vote,
trying to
Scott.
understand what we're gonna do. It shouldn't be a surprise that we okay, come Tuesday, we don't know what the city council's thinking, we don't know what they're doing. It gives them, and if they have questions or concerns, then they can reach out to us between now and then and say, you know what, Scott, I think that's a terrible idea, or it makes sense. That's why I do this,
I
to
think
try
you
to
can ask for
get
general,
that
I think you
information.
can ask for people to give their opinions if they like to give their opinions, but I don't think you can call them out and ask for a vote. That's just procedure.
Apologize if I.
Procedure.
Okay, sure, fair enough.
Thanks.
Sure. Sorry, Corin. I'm done.
He can still do.
Do we need to, anybody else have any other questions or comments or concerns or?
Go forth and
I
conquer.
think it's fair to make it equitable.
I was just gonna say, go forth and conquer. I guess I'm used to living in higher tax bases like DC and unafraid to pay more, but go forth and conquer. I mean,
I like your hat, by the way.
What a shock to know. About that hat.
I think, yeah, I don't have anything that contributes to your short term. I think the only thing I wanted to add was that, I think you should cast your wider net on your deficit spending, because it isn't 3 years, or 4 years. COVID saved our bacon, but if you look before COVID, so take COVID out, look before COVID, there was a deficit. 19, 18, 17 was a projected deficit, but it wasn't. So it's a lot longer than just
That's a good point.
repeal of the seasonal sales tax.
During some of those years, the city sold assets that kind of made up for some of the deficit. They sold the,
good. I didn't know
they
that.
sold that childcare building, and they sold the old library. Those are two sales anyway that I know of that they sold that helped kind of gap those years too.
So wants to.
I think the budget was 11 million in 2015. 10 years fast forwarded, 75% increase or so, just rough math. Bankers don't do math without calculators, but that seems like a big increase in expenses. I mean, and you had that with COVID when cash was flush, And where did it ever dip off after COVID fell off?
Do we have a work session on Tuesday as well? That's on the budget as well?
And BOE.
That won't be doing the work session.
I know.
Is that it?
And BOE.
Is that the end then? We good?
Yes. See you all Tuesday.
Thank you, everybody, for coming.
Yeah.
Appreciate the feedback.
That helps.
Okay, thanks, Adam.
Thank you.
Thank you all for coming.
Enjoy the Memorial Day weekend, man.
And don't forget, Monday morning,
I will not be here.
okay, if you're not here, we start at the Old Cub Veterans of Memorial Day Parade to the cemetery and, yes, 11, about 45 minutes.